And what gang are you from MS-1 here in this center for the last 2 years? Yes, these are the circumstances of the things that everyone does, or well, most of them. If you ask them if they would kill, they would say no, that it's an atrocity, a crime that no one should commit. But if I told you that your family's life depends on this choice? This was part of the story of a young man who was interviewed inside CECOT and who left speechless. Do you want to find out what other secrets he revealed? Stay until the end of the video and discover the atmosphere in the interview room at the CECOT Terrorist Confinement Center. It was charged with tension. A dense and oppressive silence took over the space, barely broken by the metallic sound of handcuffs being tightened and the creaking of shackles as they rubbed against the concrete floor. The lighting was cold and clinical, designed to dehumanize whoever was in that chair. That afternoon would be the a name that echoed with fear in the streets of El Salvador. The one who would occupy that place. A man whose criminal record was shrouded in legend and nightmares. A man reportedly responsible for more than 100 murders, although the true number would never be known. When they brought him in, 2 guards escorted him firmly. His thin build and tattoos covering almost all of his skin told a story the authorities knew very well. He did not resist. He had not done so since the day of his capture. His gaze was not challenging, but it showed no remorse either. There was something cold and calculating in his eyes, as if he were used to being scrutinized, as if he knew that despite being chained, he still controlled the atmosphere with his mere presence. Underscore was not a man chosen at the interview. He had earned it with blood. The interview began with routine questions, the typical ones you would expect in a prison environment. However, at some point, his tone changed when he was asked to talk about the crimes for which he had been imprisoned. At first, he responded indifferently, as if tired of repeating them. But then, perhaps seeking some twisted pleasure in his memories, he began to speak with chilling detail. There was no emotion in his voice, only a narrative, cold and devoid of remorse. I killed more than 100 people, he said with terrifying calm. Most didn't even deserve to die. But that didn't matter. His voice was monotonous, almost as if reciting a shopping list. He wasn't trying to justify himself. There were no excuses or stories from a difficult childhood to soften the harshness of his words. For him, death was a tool, a means to gain power and control. He began to describe some of his most infamous crimes, as if he were recounting everyday events. He spoke of that night in a neighborhood from San Salvador, where he received the order to execute an entire family that had disrespected his organization. He recalled in disturbing detail how they broke into the house with his armed group, kicking down the door and finding a terrified family. There were no screams at first, he said with a slight smile. They were frozen with fear. It's curious how some react like that. He continued, describing almost with surgical precision how he made each member of the family kneel before him, one after another. I looked them in the eyes before doing what I had to do, he said, as if searching for some fleeting connection with his victims before ending their lives. What was disturbing wasn't just the violence in his words, but the total absence of emotion. Children take the longest to understand what's happening. He added in a neutral tone. They cling to their parents, as if that could save them. When asked why he did it, his answer was even more disturbing. Because it was necessary, he said without hesitation. If I didn't do it, or would someone else do in our lives? Kill or be killed. He didn't see himself as a monster, but as someone who had simply accepted an inevitable role in the cycle of violence that dominated his world. One of the most chilling stories was when he spoke of his initiation into the gang. To test his loyalty, they ordered him to execute a man who owed money to the organization. The man begged for his life, promising to pay, offering anything for another chance. He looked me straight in the eyes. He remembered as if he could find some compassion in me, but that man was dead from the moment he was pointed at. The most disturbing thing was how he described the final shot. I didn't blink. I just pulled the trigger and felt the recoil like a click, as if something inside me had also broken. He also spoke of kidnappings, extortions, and planned executions. With military precision, he described how his group ambushed police patrols, firing bursts from automatic rifles and leaving messages for their enemies. For others, fear is power, he said, When they know you're willing to do anything, no one dares to cross you. Perhaps the most disturbing thing was when he described how some of his murders became personal. Not all of them were orders, some were for pleasure. He admitted that eventually stopping killing would have been harder than continuing to do it afterward. After number 20, it no longer counts. He said coldly, "You lose count, and so does the meaning." Throughout the interview, he never showed remorse or regret, even when asked if he regretted anything. He simply shrugged. "What's the point of regret?" He replied, "Nothing I've done can change the past. It's like a tattoo that stays forever." However, for a brief moment, his mask of indifference seemed to crack. When he mentioned his own family, "I have children," he said quietly. "I'll never see them grow up. I'll never be able to protect them from all of this." That's life for the first time. A trace of humanity crept into his voice, as if acknowledging that his fate was sealed and that the legacy of death he had left behind. Back then, it was also a condemnation for them. When asked if he was afraid of dying in prison, he let out a dry laugh. "I'm already dead," he said. "I died a long time ago, the day I stopped caring about what was right or wrong." With a chilling calm, the __ began describing how the process worked. From the moment they capture a member of a rival gang, there was no room for forgiveness or negotiation. For the MS-13, capturing an enemy wasn't just an act of war. It was an opportunity to send an indelible message of power and domination. "We never kill quickly," he said, with a trace of regret. "That would be too easy and merciful." His voice was monotonous, almost boring, as if recounting the routine of any daily job. The captured men were taken to well-known places, like torture houses, clandestine hideouts where the most atrocious acts were carried out. These houses, many sometimes located in gang-controlled neighborhoods, they were true chambers of horror where screams remained unheard behind thick soundproof walls. "That's where the real fun began," he said. With a crooked smile, he described in detail how the prisoners were stripped of their clothes and tied hand and foot, hung from the ceiling or tied to metal chairs specially designed to immobilize bones. "The first thing is to let them know there's no escape." He explained, "We blindfolded them so they wouldn't know how many of us were there. The fear is stronger. When you can't see, the torture routine began with beatings, endless blows, baseball matches, metal pipes, and chains became a macabre symphony that lasted for hours. We didn't let them faint so quickly," he explained with icy coldness. "If they fainted, we would wake them up with buckets of ice-cold water or lit cigarettes against the skin," the __ recounted without altering his tone of voice, as if he were sharing a recipe learned through years of practice. The torturers, according to him, had their own specialties. Some preferred slow methods such as pulling out nails with pliers or even using knives, inflicting precise cuts that didn't kill but hurt deeply. Others enjoyed more direct methods, such as systematically breaking bones. Starting with the fingers and ending with the legs, the __ indifferently admitted that it wasn't personal, it was a matter of discipline. The women who were captured faced a fate that was equally cruel, if not worse. According to the __ Hess account, they were subjected to constant physical and sexual abuse, further proof of the level of dehumanization that prevailed in that world. The women of rival gangs were seen as spoils of war, objects destined to satisfy the basest instincts of their captors before being eliminated. "There are no exceptions," he said coldly. "The rules are the rules." Sometimes the torture wasn't just physical, but also psychological. The prisoners were forced to listen to the screams of their companions being tortured in adjoining rooms, knowing that eventually their turn would come. They wanted us to know what awaited them. For __ fear was the most powerful weapon, even more so than any firearm. One of the most disturbing stories he shared was how the prisoners were forced to finish their own graves before being killed. "We gave them shovels and made them work for hours," he explained calmly. "We kept them alive just so they would feel the weight of what awaited them once the excavation was finished." They were executed in brutal ways, from shots to the head to being buried alive, depending on the level of hatred or offense they had committed when they were killed. They asked if he ever felt compassion for any of his victims. The underscore shrugged and answered without hesitation that compassion is of no use in our world. If you stop to think about it, they will kill you. According to him, showing your foot was a sign of compassion, weakness that couldn't be allowed. Even when they grew tired of their prisoners, death didn't come immediately. When we grew tired of them, they executed them. They threw the prisoners into barrels filled with acid, letting the corrosive liquid slowly disintegrate their bodies, leaving nothing behind. He explained coldly, "Without bodies, there's no evidence. In some cases, the bodies were dismembered and scattered throughout different parts of the city as a warning." He explained that the remains were placed in strategic locations outside police stations, schools, or busy markets. Each part of the body told a story, he said with a chilling air of professionalism. The guards listening to the interview wore stern expressions, accustomed to stories like this, but the eyes of some betrayed a mixture of disgust and horror. For them, these weren't simple crime stories, but events they had seen up close. During years of clashes with gangs, when asked if he ever regretted what he had done, underscore once again displayed his characteristic indifference. Regret is for the weak. He answered everything he left for power, out of respect and fear, and it worked. If he could, he would do it again. The interview had ended, and the heavy silence enveloped the room like a shroud. The cold, disturbing confessions of underscore still echoed off the walls, as if the atmosphere itself had been imbued with the horrors he described. The guards, hardened by years of confronting ruthless criminals, barely showed any emotion as they escorted the next prisoner to be interviewed. This time, they brought in a gaunt-looking young man with sunken eyes that seemed burdened with stories. His face was covered in small scars and marks of violence, contrasting sharply with his body was thin and fragile. He was one of the many trapped in the prison system that seemed to have no end. They sat him on the same metal chair, as cold as concrete beneath his bare feet. His hands were handcuffed, and his gaze remained cold, fixed on the floor, as if looking into the interviewer's eyes caused him more pain than the chains that bound him. The silence dragged on until they ordered him to say his name and tell his story. At first, his voice was barely a whisper, but little by little, it gained strength, as if the words repressed for years had finally found a crack through which to escape. By the way, if you enjoy the video, we invite you to give us your like and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. We continue. My name is Erick, but here, it doesn't matter what they call me anymore. No one has called me by my name for a long time. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from accumulated fatigue. I'm not like the others. I never wanted to be part of this, but they didn't give me any other option. Erick began to tell his story with palpable pain in every word. He was the eldest son of a humble family living in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in San Salvador. His father worked as a bus driver, and his mother sold fruit at a small market stall. His two younger sisters were all that mattered to him in the world. The neighborhood was dominated by the Salvadoran 13 gang, or MS-13. From a young age, Erick was learning to move carefully to avoid any contact with gang members. "I always knew my life was surrounded by death," he said in a hushed tone. He saw bodies in the streets. He heard the gunshots at night, but as long as I stayed away, as long as I looked the other way, I thought I could escape. But that hope ended one day when I was 16. It was a day I revived. Over and over again in his mind, like a never-ending nightmare, he had gone to the Del Barrio store to buy milk for his sisters when 3 men intercepted him. They were known members of the gang, tattooed from head to toe with blank stares and cruel smiles. They ordered him to follow them without asking questions. Erick tried to resist, but one of them pulled out a gun and pointed it at his head. "If you scream or run, your family will die," they warned him with chilling calm. With no other options, Erick obeyed. They took him to an abandoned house in a dark alley where other members of the gang were waiting for him. Their gazes were predatory, sizing him up like a butcher assesses an animal before slaughtering it. They brutally beat him, leaving him bloody and barely conscious on the ground. "Now you're one of us," they told him after the beating. "If you don't do what we tell you, your family will be." The threat was burned into his mind from that moment on. Erick's life became a constant nightmare. They gave him a gun and ordered him to participate in extortion, robbery, and beatings of anyone who disobeyed. They knew where my family lived. They could kill them at any moment. I had to pour myself into what they wanted or die with tears in his eyes. Erick recounted the first time he was ordered to kill someone. It was a market trader who had refused to pay the fee imposed by the gang. The leaders gave him a gun and told him that if he didn't, his sisters would be raped and murdered in front of him. I took him behind the market. He begged me for his life. He begged me to think of my soul. He remembered his voice trembling. I closed my eyes and just shot. That moment tore him apart. Inside, I felt as if something inside me was dying. He also admitted, but the horror didn't end there. With each crime he was forced to commit, he felt more trapped, more chained to a fate he couldn't escape. He wanted to run away. He confessed. But where there is no safe place, when you become part of them, if you run, they kill you and everyone you love. Days turned into months. And then, over the years, Erick hardened, learning to hide his fear and pain behind a mask of FR. But inside, he was still the same scared young man who only wanted to protect his family. He never stopped dreaming of a way out, even though he knew it was impossible. He lived waiting for the day they would kill me. He said with resignation. Sometimes he wished Erick's downfall would come soon. It finally happened during a massive raid in his neighborhood. He was captured along with other gang members while trying to escape a confrontation with the police. He didn't resist. Deep down, he was tired of running. He was sentenced to more than 50 years in prison for the crimes he had participated in, even though many of them had been coerced. They made me a monster, he said in a barely audible whisper. And now I'm here paying for something I never wanted. He was silent for several minutes, as if reliving each of his decisions, each of his losses. He finally looked up and with a mixture of hopelessness and defiance added, I know I deserve to be here, but I also know I never had a choice. And so we come to the end of this video. If you liked it, I invite you to give us a like so we can continue making more videos like this one. Also, don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. I wish you a great day. See you next time.